What is all this?
What's the matter? Don't you like books?
But a computer takes less space.
I never use it. I've got my own system. Books, young man. Books, thousands of them.
Hello everybody. Well, although I wouldn't be as much an absolutist as Attorney Cogley is in that classic episode of Star Trek original series called Court Martial, they're also with Captain Kirk, played by William Shatner, I will say that books still do have their place in research and scholarship, particularly in movies and film scholarship, cinema scholarship, I guess. And I do have things that are in those books right there that are not on the internet. You can't find the information in many cases that are in those books. Now, yeah, you'll find the basic facts on the internet, but you're not going to find the way the information is curated in those books. And sometimes there are bits of information that don't get out to the internet. So this is why I keep a nice reference book collection of film information in my library, and why sometimes I actually find things that I can't find on the internet in those books, or sometimes I find them faster in those books than I can find them on the internet. So someone who watches this channel asked me to make a video showing my film book collection, my film reference book collection. It's going to be in multiple parts because there are too many books to go over, and I kind of at least want to say something about each book. So let's get started anyway. So for 99.9% of you, this video won't be for you. It will be for people who really want to see a well-curated film book library. This collection has come together over the course of more than 4 decades. I started reading some of these books when I was in high school, or even earlier than that, middle school in the mid to late 70s. And I have a lot of those books that I used to check out from the library. I now own those. So let's look. So this part, I just sort of have some biographies, show business and entertainment biographies on paperback. But I do have a few reference books. I have Cobbett Steinberg's Real Facts that came out in 1978. This is still actually a useful book because he has the first AFI top 25 movies list in here, which is published nowhere else. It isn't even on the internet. You can't find it. Another reason to have books. And when people talk about the 1998 AFI list, they never mention the 1977 list, which is printed in here. So again, very interesting. And then we've got the Porter and Martin DVD and Video Guide 2006. I don't really care for this guide. Their criticism is kind of lazy, but I've got one copy of one of their guides. They were very popular, but I'm not big on those. This one I really like. This is Stephen Shure. He started doing movie guides way back around 1959. He was the first one in the game. His are a little more intellectual. The films he covers are a little more international and varied and more independent and art films. So I've always respected this guide. This is a 1986 edition. No, 84, 85. Yeah. Here's a Variety portable movie guide. I don't think they rate the movies. They just list a bunch of movies. And they give decent reviews. They're pretty well done for that size. Got 2 copies of Michael Gebbert's Encyclopedia of Music Awards here book. I actually wrote an email to this guy one time telling him how good his book is. It really is good. It goes through the history of different movie awards, Academy Awards, and film festival awards. And he gives really funny judgments in this thing. He's a really good writer, really smart guy. He had his own film society, I think. Okay, so we got several copies of Leonard Maltin's guides. Probably nothing needs to be said about these. Here's another one that I got recently. I mean, they're kind of the standard. Everybody likes them. Everybody used to depend on these back in the 80s and 90s. He got into the game in the late 60s. These are some of the later guides. I used to have a 1977 guide. I got rid of it a long time ago because it got worn out. Unfortunately, that one is worth money. I wish I'd kept it. But this is a film guide. Actually, this is a compact history of the cinema by Barron's. It's actually pretty good. It's very well illustrated, very well presented, and very nice. It's a pocket size. Here's a Academy Awards handbook by Jonathan Harkness. Very well done. This is similar to Gebbert's guide that I just showed you. Not quite as personal. or really interesting as Gebert's is, but not bad. And Cobbett Sternberg's is also good, but here's one called the Wordsworth Book of Movie Classics. This was also called something else. I think it was just called Book of Movie Classics. It's a good list of, like, I think 100 classic movies from around the world. It's pretty good, actually. I got that at like a traveling thrift book sale thing. This is Contemporary Cinema by Penelope Houston, British film scholar and critic. This is covering movies of the 60s mainly. This was written, I think, in the early to mid 60s. This is rare, actually. I haven't been able to find another copy of that. And film history, world film history, or world history of film by Sklar, Robert Sklar. I remember seeing this at the library and was very impressed by it. It really has good information on the early cinema in here. It's a really beautiful, giant encyclopedic reference book. Very well done, very well researched, very scholarly, and enormous. But I'm glad I was able to find a cheap copy of that. An earlier sort of edition, not the same, but this is a 1972, 74, somewhere in there. World Encyclopedia of the Film. This is one I used to look at when I was in high school back in the late 70s. My library at my school had this, and it's just a standard film encyclopedia. It has biographies and credits on major people in the movies. Well illustrated. I used to make my early film lists out of this, and I was so happy to get a copy of this off of eBay back in the day. And here's Cinema Year by Year, 1894 to 2000. There are several editions of this out there. This is pretty good. It's chronological. It's kind of corny. It's like they do it kind of newspaper headline style. They're trying to make it contemporary. I'm not crazy about that kind of presentation, but it does compartmentalize it in a sensible way, and there's a lot of stuff in there. It's a good international survey. And now we've got the worst film guide of all time, The Film Buff's Checklist by D. Richard Baer. Checklist of Motion Pictures 1912 to 1979. This guy is a complete Philistine. He hates anything that isn't standard entertainment, and he's very contemptuous of most film art. And it's just funny to have this just kind of as a goof. I made a video on how much I hate this book, even though I have a copy of it. Now I'm going to show you two film catalogs from the 70s. This Audio Brandon 16mm Collections of International Cinema Guide. My middle school teacher gave me this back, I think, in the 6th grade, because he knew I loved film and he thought I'd appreciate this, and I did very much. This is a great cinema book unto itself. It's a guide to 16mm film rentals and institutions, schools, churches, and such used to rent to show to people before we had VHS and stuff. It's really complete. It has credits, summaries, and critical opinions inserted in here. Illustrations. Very well made, very well done. I've always loved these. I found a second one just to have a backup in case I wore one out. Actually, I think this is the backup. And then there was the Macmillan Audio Brandon Film Guide. This came out a little bit later. This is from 75, 76. This is the same thing as that, but they got a little cheaper. It's not quite as good. I mean, it's more or less the same idea, but Macmillan bought out Audio Brandon, and so that was a continuation of that. This organization no longer exists, and their films have been dispersed. Nobody knows whatever happened to the collections of Audio Brandon. It's kind of a mystery. Probably got junked. Anyway, Forgotten Films to Remember by John Springer. Again, just another survey, year by year. I have to admit, I've never really looked at this that much, but when I saw it for like $1, I had to get that. Screen Deco, a celebration of high style in Hollywood. Got this for $3 at McKay's Books. Not a common book to run across. Beautifully illustrated book on the history of Art Deco design in movies. Very nice. Again, really haven't looked at that too much, but could not pass on that when I found that. All right, now we got one of the greats. We got one of the great books, Classics of the Foreign Film by Parker Tyler. This came out around 1960, and it is a survey of about, I think, 84 classic foreign movies, foreign from the standpoint of an American. International movies. Very perceptive critic, Parker Tyler. Gore Vidal talked about him in the novel Myra Breckinridge very admiringly. And this, for many people, was the first time they'd ever heard of some of these movies that he talks about. Of course, they're now regarded commonly as international classics, but it's really great. It's really great to have a copy of that in my collection. We have Peter Cowie's 70 Years of Cinema, another survey book. Again, it says what it is. He goes year by year and he'll highlight some very important movies with his very perceptive criticism, and then at the end of each chapter he'll have a list of adjunct movies that you should be watching if you're interested in the history of movies. Very well done. Now we're getting to a really important one for me, the International Encyclopedia of Film. I have 2 copies. There's nothing different about these 2 copies. I will show you that this one's thinner than this one. This one's the earlier one. I think it came out in 72. This one came out in 75. They're on Crown Publishers. The difference is no difference. You think, well, it's thicker, one's thinner. The page stock is thicker on this edition. That's the only reason this one is thicker. They both have 574 pages. This is a beautifully illustrated book, and it's, again, a film encyclopedia. This is one of the best ever done up to its time. I don't know who the editor was. Roger Manville was the editor of this. These are incredibly well done, and I used to check this out when I was in high school. I actually didn't check it out. They didn't let you check it out. You had to, like, look at it at the table in high school. I used to make film lists out of these. And really glad to have that in my collection. Managed to find 2 copies really cheap. The Disney Films by Leonard Maltin. Leonard Maltin did a bunch of kind of survey movie books. Back when he was first starting out, this one was done about 1970. He did one on Our Gang, Little Rascals. He also did one on just short films in general, the great short films. I remember checking those out when I was in school back in the day. This Disney Films one is probably the first really good overall survey of the history of the Disney studio. There's been many done since, but he was kind of at the forefront with that. And here we have the great movie shorts by Leonard Maltin. This is another really great one. I used to make film lists out of this when I was trying to see these short movies, these vintage short movies. There's a lot of comedians in this, because a lot of comedy shorts existed back in the 30s and 40s and the 20s. Again, that's kind of a classic of its type from Leonard Maltin. We've got Kevin Brownlow's classic book, The Parade's Gone By, about the history of the silent era. This is a beautiful early edition. This is a peerless book, really. He did another one called Hollywood the Pioneers, and probably a couple others that I've forgotten about, but that's a great one. I spent a little money for that one. It's worth it. It's one of the foundational books. That's all, folks. Art of Warner Brothers Animation by Steve Schneider. This is really well done. This is a really beautiful book. I mean, it is what it says it is, the Art of Warner Brothers Animation. And in the back, I think they've got a filmography, if I'm not mistaken. I don't want to ruin it. There he is. Really nice. Beautiful. Now, one of the studio books. I've got several studio books in here. Okay, here we got MGM When the Lion Roars. Some of you guys might remember in the early 90s, Turner Classic Movies did, or it was TNT maybe, Turner Network Television. Same difference. Patrick Stewart hosted a multi-part miniseries, documentary series on the history of the Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer Studios. Of course, Turner owns, or did own, I guess they still do, the rights to all the MGM classic movies from the golden age of Hollywood. And so they did this very ambitious series about that era, especially the silent era. And this is an adjunct book to that. It's pretty incredible. I mean, there's Greta Garbo and Queen Christina, and it is what you would think it is. It's a thorough history of a great studio, beautifully illustrated, gorgeous book. And I also have another MGM studio overview over here. I guess we'll have to wait till we get to that one. Here's a book by Mark Vieira, a guy who's done a lot of big coffee table books on Hollywood. This was Greta Garbo, Cinematic Legacy. These are amazing prints of photographs from movies, movie stills. And it's a history of Greta Garbo, her career. And this is one of the most beautifully printed books I've ever seen. Very nice. It's not as beautiful as the one he did on Pre-Code Hollywood, but it's kind of in the same vein. We got Richard Griffith and Arthur Mayer's The Movies. This one came out in the 50s when there weren't many movie reference books out yet. Believe it or not, I only paid $3 for this behemoth. Again, it is a survey of the history of movies. It's a little bit, feels like it's falling apart a hair in there. It's like making a crackling sound. But again, this is an early foundational film history book. Very nice to have that. Now we're getting into a real classic. The Silent Clowns by Walter Kerr. This is one of the great books about the silent cinema. I did pay a little bit for this. I paid 20 bucks. This was back when it was kind of hard to find this book. I think it still is. Again, it's just a peerless book on the history of movie comedy in the silent period. Chaplin, Keaton, Harold Lloyd, all those guys. And it's in immaculate condition. It has the Mylar on it. Here's another Mark Vieira book. I just mentioned this, Sin and Soft Focus, Pre-Code Hollywood. This is one of the most beautifully printed books I've ever seen. The stills in here are just stunning. It's a really good history of pre-code era Hollywood from 1930 to 1934 roughly. And this is definitely a must-have if you have a movie book collection at all. So there's Clara Bow on the cover. Now these are two oddities. This is In the Picture, production of stills from the TCM archives, Turner Classic Movies. Introduction by Robert Osborne. And this is kind of what it says it is. It's pictures from classic movies, mainly from the silent period. Really nice, in the golden era of the 30s. Turner Classic Movies, Stills, Archives, which I'm sure is something they got when they bought their MGM Film Archives. Don't really have much use for that book as a reference book per se, but it's a nice aesthetic item to have. We've got The Stuff That Dreams Are Made Of, Warner Brothers Studios. This again is kind of a Turner Classic style thing. This one is really cool. This one really takes you into the studio. Like you feel like stepping into a time machine with this one. You're really on the back lot in the cafeteria with the carpenters, you know. They're reusing all the nails for the new sets and whatnot. And yeah, this is great. That's a great one. As picture books go, it's really wonderful. Second row, we got a film catalog from Movies Unlimited. I don't know if anybody remembers this company. They used to put out catalogs back in the 1990s and 2000s. This is a 2004 video catalog. It's a video catalog. It's for videos for sale. VHS and DVDs at that time. And it is what it is. I mean, you've got... I find these to be great reference books, these old video catalogs. Even though these are commercial catalogs. They're well illustrated. Tons of movies in these things. And they're kind of broken up by genre, category, and whatnot. Martial arts. And... trying to see. Yeah, you got kind of your erotic stuff back here. There's Bo Derek. So, and I got some of the monthly updates kind of stuffed in here too, which is cool. I love having stuff like that. Now we have another encyclopedic scholarly history of a national film, the Australian film, 1978 to 1992 by Scott Murray. I have to say I haven't really delved into this one that much, but I have seen surprisingly a large number of these movies, shockingly. Maybe not so shockingly, but this is a really good overview of the history of Australian movies and important movies from Australia. This is a recent acquisition that I got, Paolo Cerci Usai's Silent Cinema, a guide to study research and curatorship. This is a lot to do with saving films, archiving movies, the history of films, film stock, the destruction of movies, the deterioration of them, how they were exhibited. Really wonderful book. Cerci Usai is, Paolo Cerci Usai is one of the foremost archivists alive in the world, has been for many years, scholar. He wrote a giant multi-part series on D.W. Griffith's films. Oh, here's the Audio Brandon film catalog again. This is a backup copy. So I got my old copy up here and my backup down here. Again, this was a rental catalog, but it's a great film reference unto itself. There's a giant gap here, and that's because I'm selling a British film catalog that I don't need. It's taken up too much room. It hasn't really been of much use to me, but it is a rare book, but it wasn't serving much of a purpose for me, and I do need money, and I do need to make space for other books that are more important. So that one's going. Story of Cinema by David Shipman. This is an absolute must-have book. I've got 2 copies of this. This is a pristine copy. I've got a more beat-up copy that I actually use for reference. Luckily, I found this copy for $8. Not too bad. David Shipman is a very opinionated guy. He has some very contrarian opinions on the history of cinema, and some of the filmmakers he highlights and extols aren't talked about enough. So he's a good corrective to that. He has a real personality. There's a real personality in this writing. He's, I would say, flamboyant in a way. He dismisses some very well-regarded movies, but also champions some lesser-known ones, probably for the better. His presentation is roughly chronological, but he talks about different international cinemas. And this is really a unique history of the movies, and probably should have that in your film book collection. And you should read it. I've never read all of it, but I've read large chunks of it. Here's a book that was very influential to Martin Scorsese. It's The Pictorial History of the Movies by Deems Taylor. This came out in the 40s, so it's a pretty old book. This was one of the very first cinema surveys ever published. Probably the first of its kind that's a pictorial history. We've had many of these since, of course, but for the time, this was brand new. And it's a great, important, early foundational work. And, of course, it's well illustrated. Movie Lot to Beachhead. This is a real rarity. This is a cool book about Hollywood during World War II. Basically, all the movies that were made, especially war movies during World War II, and what the studios were doing to cooperate with the U.S. government. You know, the propaganda and the business, how everything was geared up to give morale to the country and to the soldiers and whatnot. Goes into great detail about it, and it's not a common book to find. Kind of rare, actually. Okay, we got one of Hallowell's film guides here. This one is from, I think, 1980-ish, 1980 maybe. This one's in beautiful condition. I actually showed this in another video. We know about Hallowell. He is an important film critic, and this is an important film guide, but he's limited. He loves classic Hollywood. He doesn't seem to like much else. He does like some international movies. Well, he's deceased. I'm talking the present tense, but this is a great guide, but you should take it with a grain of salt. You got to consider all the opinions of all these other people, not just his, because he was very persnickety, let's be honest. Here's a later edition that John Walker edited. I find this more or less just as good as the older ones. Some people disagree about that, but I don't really care. So, Hallowell's Filmgoer's Companion, this is more like a film encyclopedia. This is more like a film guide, where they have the titles rated and the summaries and the judgment. And this is just movie stars, directors, writers, people in the business, stuff like that. This is 2-volume set, John Wakeman's World Film Directors. Volume 1, 1890 to 1945. Volume 2, 1945 to 1985. This is a really, really good encyclopedia. Very in-depth, goes over the entire careers of all these directors, and very well written, presented, very scholarly. It surveys a lot of critics and scholars about filmmakers. This is a foundational set in my collection. This is kind of a similar thing. I don't really refer to this one much, but this was a film director encyclopedia done by it's called the St. James Film Directors Encyclopedia. Kind of the same deal. I mean, it goes over famous directors in one volume. So it's basically a one-volume version of this, sort of. This is a bunch of little books and film guides. I've got home film festival catalogs from the 90s and 2000s. This was back in the days before Netflix, when you would order VHSs through the mail, which I used to do. And, you know, I've got some Sight and Sound magazines here, British Film Magazine, etc. Film Follies by Stuart Claywans. This is a really good essay book on various movies that were considered follies or boondoggles, but are also highly admired movies. These are very perceptive essays on movies. I really like that. This is part of a great series called The History of the American Cinema, and this is volume, I don't know which volume it is. It's the 1930 to 1939 volume, so a very important volume in the series. This is called Grand Design, Hollywood as a Modern Business Enterprise, 1930 to 1939 by Tino Ballio. This is one of the best film books I've ever seen, honestly. This one goes deep into the whole business of cinema, the distribution, exhibition, the making of, what was going on in the theaters, etc. Really covers a lot of stuff that most film courses and film discussions don't cover. This is pretty essential. I would say that any volume from this series is essential. Alright, so I was only able to get through some of my film reference book collection. That'll be part 1. We'll make a part 2 because the amount of editing and processing that it's going to take to edit all this down is going to be so long, and it's going to strain my computer and probably take a long time to upload. So we'll do maybe 2-3 parts for this. This will be part 1, so I hope you enjoyed that.